The lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as 300 of the galaxy's brightest military academy students settled into their seats. The Zenthari Military Institute stood as the premier war college in known space, its crystalline spires reaching toward the stars from the moon of Kepler 442c. Students from 47 different species had gathered for the most anticipated class of their final semester: Restricted Species and Galactic Warfare Protocols. Zix Thala adjusted her sensory tendrils nervously, the young Kepler's bioluminescent patches flickering between blue and green with anxiety. Beside her, her study partner Grexamar clicked his mandibles in anticipation. The towering insectoid Vorthak had been her closest friend since their first year, despite their species' historical conflicts. "I heard Professor Vexitani once witnessed a human engagement," Grexamar whispered, his compound eyes reflecting the ambient light. "Before the ban, obviously." "That's impossible," Zix Thala replied, her translator converting her chemical emissions into audible speech. "The Human Exclusion Act was passed 2 centuries ago. No one alive today has seen them in combat." The massive doors at the front of the amphitheater hissed open, and Professor Vextani entered with her characteristic measured pace. The ancient Mordak professor moved slowly, her 6 arms carrying various data tablets and holographic projectors. Her species was among the oldest in the galaxy, and at nearly 400 years old, she commanded respect from every student and faculty member. "Settle down," her voice resonated through the hall without amplification. A natural ability of her species. "Today we discuss the most dangerous topic in galactic military history. Some of you will question what you learn. Others will refuse to believe it. A few might even request transfers to other programs." The hall fell completely silent. Even the usual background hum of various species' breathing apparatus seemed quiet. Professor Vexitani activated the central holographic display, showing a standard galactic map with trade routes, military zones, and territorial boundaries clearly marked. One section, roughly 3% of the total mapped galaxy, pulsed with an ominous red warning indicator. "Can anyone tell me what this red zone represents?" A Drakmori student in the back raised her scaled hand. "The human quarantine zone, Professor. It's been off-limits for military operations since the Galactic Accord of 2387. "Correct, Cadet Silandra. And why was this zone established?" Another student, a crystalline Zarathi, projected his response through light patterns. "The official records state that humans posed an unacceptable risk to galactic stability due to their unpredictable nature and violent tendencies." Professor Vexitani's expression remained neutral, but Zix Thala noticed the subtle color shift in her skin that indicated deep thought among the Mordak. "The official records tell only part of the story. Today you will learn the classified truth that only top military commanders and government officials know." She manipulated the holographic controls, and the display shifted to show detailed recordings from military archives. The timestamp indicated these files were nearly 250 years old. "The human species was discovered by a Zenthari exploration vessel in the year 2156. Initial contact protocols were followed perfectly. The humans appeared to be a young species, having only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their technology was primitive compared to galactic standards, their population small, and their territorial claims modest. The hologram showed images of early human settlements, their crude metal ships, and diplomatic meetings between human representatives and various alien officials. To the assembled cadets, the humans looked remarkably unremarkable. Bipedal, carbon-based, no natural weapons or armor, no obvious technological advantages. The Galactic Council voted to grant humans limited membership status, with the standard 50-year probationary period. They were assigned a small sector for colonization and offered the usual technological assistance packages that we provide to developing species. Grexmar leaned toward Zixthala. They look so ordinary. What could possibly have made them dangerous enough to ban from warfare? Professor Vexitani continued, seemingly oblivious to the whispered conversations throughout the hall. The humans integrated well into galactic society. They were eager to learn, quick to adapt new technologies, and showed remarkable aptitude for diplomacy. Many species began to view them as ideal junior partners in the galactic community. The holographic display shifted again, now showing bustling human colonies, trade agreements, and what appeared to be humans working alongside various alien species in research facilities and commercial ventures. The first indication that humans might be different came during a routine border dispute between the Theknari Empire and the Vorlian Collective. It was a minor territorial disagreement, the kind we see dozens of times each century. Standard galactic protocol called for limited military engagement to establish dominance and resolve the issue. Zixthala had studied dozens of such conflicts in her strategic planning courses. They were almost ritualistic in nature, with well-established rules of engagement, predetermined objectives, and minimal casualties. Most galactic species had evolved beyond total warfare, finding it inefficient and wasteful. The humans volunteered to assist the Vorlian Collective, with whom they had established favorable trade relations. The Galactic Council approved their participation, viewing it as an excellent opportunity for the humans to gain practical military experience under controlled conditions. The professor's expression darkened, and the ambient lighting in the hall seemed to dim in response to her mood. What happened next changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The holographic display filled with tactical readouts from the engagement. Fleet positions, ship classifications, and battle progression charts filled the air above the students. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard limited engagement between roughly equal forces. The initial phase proceeded exactly as predicted. Two fleets of approximately equal strength maneuvered for position, exchanged limited fire, and began the standard dominance displays that typically resolve such conflicts. The Theknari forces were slightly superior in number and firepower, but the Vorlians had better positioning. A three-dimensional battle map materialized, showing ship movements and engagement patterns. The students recognized the classic formations and tactical approaches that had been used in galactic warfare for millennia. The humans provided 3 small vessels to support the Vorlian fleet. Their ships were unremarkable, equipped with standard galactic technology we had provided during their integration period. By all calculations, their contribution should have been minimal but symbolic. Professor Vexitani paused, allowing the students to study the tactical display. The human ships appeared as tiny blue dots among the larger Vorlian vessels, facing off against the red Theknari fleet. Everything changed in the 4th hour of engagement. The holographic battle map began to move, showing the progression of the conflict in real time. For the first several hours, everything proceeded as expected. Ships maneuvered cautiously, exchanged fire at long range, and followed the established protocols for limited warfare. Then something extraordinary happened. The 3 small human vessels suddenly broke formation, accelerating far beyond their supposed maximum velocity directly toward the Theknari fleet. Their movement patterns became erratic, unpredictable, completely abandoning every tactical doctrine known to galactic warfare. The Theknari commanders initially assumed the humans were retreating in panic or experiencing technical difficulties, Professor Vexitani explained. Such behavior had never been witnessed in organized military engagement. It appeared to be either cowardice or incompetence. But the tactical display revealed something far more disturbing. The human ships weren't fleeing at all. They were attacking, but using methods that defied all military logic and conventional understanding of space combat. "Watch carefully," the professor instructed, highlighting one of the human vessels. The lead human ship, designated Indomitable, commanded by Captain Sarah Chen, performed a maneuver that our best tactical computers still cannot fully analyze. The highlighted ship executed a series of movements that made several students gasp in disbelief. It used its own damaged engine output as a weapon, channeling radiation directly at enemy vessels while simultaneously ramming damaged Tecnari ships with its armored sections. Captain Chen deliberately caused a cascade failure in her own ship's power systems, Professor Vexitani continued. She then used the resulting explosion to propel her vessel directly into the Tecnari flagship, destroying both ships completely. Zix Thala felt her bioluminescent patches flicker rapidly with shock. Professor, that's suicide. No military doctrine includes self-destruction as a viable tactic. Precisely, the professor replied, and that was only the beginning. The tactical display continued, showing the remaining 2 human ships engaging in increasingly desperate and illogical maneuvers. They ignored damage to their own vessels, disregarded the safety of their crews, and employed tactics that prioritized maximum enemy casualties over their own survival. The second human vessel, Relentless, lost primary life support within 6 hours of engagement. Standard protocol dictates immediate withdrawal for crew safety. Instead, the crew sealed themselves into emergency suits and continued fighting for another 14 hours until their ship was completely destroyed. The silence in the lecture hall was absolute. Students from warrior species who prided themselves on courage and honor stared at the display in stunned disbelief. The third human ship, Defiant, was the most disturbing of all, Professor Vexitani continued. After sustaining critical damage that should have resulted in immediate evacuation, the crew manually overrode all safety systems and used their own ship as an improvised missile, targeting the primary Tecnari command vessel. The holographic display showed the final moments of the engagement. The damaged human ship, trailing atmosphere and debris, accelerated directly toward the enemy flagship. The impact was devastating, far beyond what should have been possible from such a small vessel. The explosion destroyed not only the command ship, but caused a chain reaction that severely damaged 4 other Tecnari vessels, the professor explained. In a single action, the humans had eliminated 30% of the enemy fleet. Grexmar's mandibles clicked nervously. What about the human crews? Surely they evacuated before the final attacks? Professor Vextani's expression grew even more solemn. There were no survivors from any of the 3 human vessels. Post-battle investigation revealed that none of the human crews made any attempt to escape their ships, even when evacuation was clearly possible. The implications of this revelation rippled through the assembled students. They came from dozens of different species with varying concepts of honor, duty, and sacrifice. But none of their military traditions included the casual acceptance of certain death as a standard tactical option. The immediate results of the engagement were decisive, Professor Vexitani continued. The Tecnari fleet withdrew in complete disorder. The border dispute was resolved in favor of the Vorlians. By conventional military analysis, the humans had achieved a stunning victory. She paused, manipulating the holographic controls to display casualty reports and damage assessments. However, the galactic military establishment was horrified by what they had witnessed. The humans had treated their own lives as expendable resources, to be deployed tactically like ammunition or fuel. This concept was completely alien to every known species in the galaxy. Zix Thala raised her arm, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with confusion. Professor, I don't understand why this was considered problematic. Many species honor those who sacrifice themselves for the greater good. An excellent point, Cadet Zix Thala. However, there is a crucial distinction between individual acts of heroism and systematic military doctrine based on expendability of personnel. The professor highlighted sections of the tactical analysis showing communication intercepts from the human vessels during the engagement. These recordings reveal that the human crews were not acting out of desperation or heroic impulse. They were following established tactical protocols that their species had developed specifically for military engagement. The willingness to die was built into their strategic thinking from the beginning. The audio recordings played through the hall's speakers, and the students listened to calm, professional voices discussing the planned destruction of their own ships with the same tone they might use to discuss routine maintenance schedules. Indomitable to Fleet Command, initiating Broken Arrow Protocol, estimate 97% casualty rate for maximum enemy damage. Relentless to Indomitable, confirmed. We're implementing Pattern Delta. No withdrawal planned. Defiant to all vessels, beginning final run. It's been an honor serving with you. The matter-of-fact delivery of these communications sent chills through the assembled cadets. There was no emotion, no dramatic speeches about honor or sacrifice. The humans discussed their own deaths with the same professional detachment that other species reserved for discussing supply logistics. The Galactic military leadership convened an emergency session immediately following this engagement, Professor Vexitani continued. Representatives from 43 species participated in the analysis of human combat doctrine. The holographic display shifted to show the meeting records from that emergency session. Lines of text in dozens of different languages scrolled past, all expressing similar themes of concern and disbelief. The consensus was unanimous. Humans represented a fundamental threat to the established order of galactic warfare. Their willingness to accept unlimited casualties for any objective made them impossible to deter through conventional means. A Zarathi student projected a question through light patterns. Professor, surely one engagement cannot provide sufficient data to make such a sweeping conclusion about an entire species. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct, Cadet Prism Light. However, the humans provided additional evidence themselves. The professor accessed new files, displaying human military archives that had been obtained through diplomatic channels. Upon request from the Galactic Council, the humans shared their military history and tactical doctrines. What we learned was even more disturbing than the initial engagement. Historical records filled the holographic display, showing centuries of human warfare on their home planet. The students watched in growing horror as the data revealed conflict after conflict in which humans had demonstrated their willingness to accept catastrophic losses for strategic objectives. Human military history includes numerous examples of what they call Pyrrhic victories and last stands. These are engagements where victory was achieved despite enormous casualties, often approaching 100% for the defending force. Images flashed through the display showing ancient human battlefields, their cities destroyed in warfare, and memorials dedicated to those who died in conflicts spanning their entire recorded history. Perhaps most disturbing was their concept of total war, a form of conflict in which every member of society becomes a potential military target and casualty. This approach treats entire populations as acceptable losses in pursuit of strategic objectives. The alien students struggled to process this information. Even the most aggressive warrior species in the galaxy had developed concepts of proportional response and civilian protection over thousands of years of cultural evolution. The humans had developed tactical nuclear weapons, biological warfare, and chemical agents specifically designed to maximize casualties among both military and civilian populations. They had used these weapons against each other multiple times. Professor Vexitani allowed this information to sink in before continuing. When questioned about these tactics, human military leaders expressed confusion about galactic concerns. To them, warfare was inherently about achieving objectives through any means necessary, regardless of cost in lives or resources. The implications were staggering. A species that viewed unlimited escalation as normal military doctrine could destabilize the entire galactic order that had maintained relative peace for thousands of years. The Galactic Council faced an unprecedented decision, Professor Vextani continued. How do you integrate a species whose military philosophy is fundamentally incompatible with civilized warfare? The holographic display showed excerpts from the council debates, with representatives from dozens of species expressing their concerns and proposed solutions. Some suggested extensive military re-education programs to teach humans proper warfare protocols. Others proposed limiting their involvement to non-combat support roles. A few species even suggested that humans might be valuable as specialized troops for extreme circumstances. She paused, her expression growing dark. Then the Kethmori incident occurred. The students leaned forward, sensing that they were about to learn something even more significant. The Kethmori were one of the most respected military powers in the galaxy, known for their disciplined approach to warfare and strategic brilliance. The Kethmori Empire offered to take responsibility for training human military forces, believing they could channel human aggression into more appropriate forms of warfare. They proposed a joint military exercise to demonstrate their success. The holographic display shifted to show preparations for the exercise, with Kethmori instructors working alongside human trainees in various military scenarios. The exercise was designed to be a simple urban pacification scenario. Kethmori forces would play the role of occupying troops, while humans served as resistance fighters. The objective was to demonstrate that humans could learn to fight within acceptable casualty parameters. Professor Vexitani's voice grew quieter, forcing the students to strain to hear her words. The exercise lasted 6 hours before it had to be terminated. The tactical display showed an urban environment with clearly marked buildings, streets, and strategic objectives. The initial setup appeared routine, similar to thousands of training exercises conducted throughout the galaxy. Within the first 2 hours, the humans had abandoned all conventional resistance tactics and begun implementing strategies that violated every rule of civilized warfare. The students watched in horror as the simulation played out. The human forces had deliberately targeted civilian areas, used improvised weapons created from training materials, and demonstrated a complete disregard for the safety of both their own forces and non-combatants. The humans employed tactics including using civilian clothing to hide among non-combatants, deliberately targeting medical facilities and support personnel, creating improvised explosive devices from training materials, and implementing systematic destruction of infrastructure to deny resources to occupying forces. Each revelation was accompanied by visual evidence from the training exercise, showing humans calmly implementing tactics that violated every convention of warfare that galactic civilization had developed over millennia. Professor Vexitani manipulated the controls, highlighting specific incidents from the exercise. The most disturbing moment came when human trainees captured several Kethmori officers during the simulation. Standard protocol called for processing prisoners according to established conventions. Instead, the humans began interrogating their captives using methods that— She paused, clearly uncomfortable with the details. The interrogation methods employed by the humans caused permanent psychological damage to the Kethmori officers involved. These were not acts of cruelty or sadism, but calculated techniques designed to extract information regardless of harm to the subject. The silence in the lecture hall was profound. Even species known for their martial prowess had developed codes of conduct that protected prisoners and non-combatants. The idea of systematic torture as standard operating procedure was beyond their comprehension. The exercise was terminated when human forces began implementing what they called scorched earth tactics, systematically destroying all resources in their assigned area to deny them to enemy forces. This included deliberate contamination of water supplies and destruction of medical facilities. The holographic display showed the aftermath of the terminated exercise, with widespread destruction that went far beyond anything intended by the training scenario. The Kethmori military leadership issued an immediate report to the Galactic Council, Professor Vexitani continued. Their conclusion was unambiguous. Humans were fundamentally incompatible with civilized warfare and posed an existential threat to galactic military order. She accessed the official report, displaying key excerpts for the students to read. Quote, "Human military doctrine demonstrates complete disregard for proportional response, civilian protection, prisoner rights, and resource conservation. Their approach to conflict represents a return to the primitive total warfare that galactic civilization abandoned millennia ago. Integration of human forces into galactic military operations would inevitably result in severe escalation and unacceptable casualties among all participating species." The weight of these words settled over the students like a heavy blanket. They were beginning to understand why humans had been excluded from galactic warfare, but the full implications were still emerging. The debate in the Galactic Council continued for months, Professor Vexitani explained. Some representatives argued that humans could be educated and reformed. Others insisted that their military exclusion was the only safe option. The decision was made when humanity itself provided the final piece of evidence. The professor accessed one more set of files, these marked with the highest classification levels available to military students. When informed of the galactic concerns about their military practices, human leadership convened their own analysis committee to address the issue. Their response eliminated any remaining doubt about the necessity of the Human Exclusion Act. The holographic display showed a simple text document, an official communication from Human Military Command to the Galactic Council. The human response stated, and I quote, "We acknowledge galactic concerns regarding our military doctrine. However, we cannot and will not modify our approach to warfare based on external preferences. If our methods are incompatible with galactic military operations, we accept exclusion rather than compromise our effectiveness." Professor Vexitani allowed the students to read the full communication, which detailed humanity's position on warfare with chilling clarity. The humans explicitly stated that they would rather be banned from galactic military participation than adopt what they considered ineffective warfare limitations. They viewed galactic military conventions as weakness that would compromise their ability to achieve victory. The final revelation left the students stunned. Humanity had chosen exclusion rather than reform, preferring to maintain their devastating military doctrine over integration with galactic society. The Human Exclusion Act was passed unanimously, Professor Vexitani concluded. Every species in the galaxy agreed that human military participation posed an unacceptable risk to galactic stability and civilized warfare. As the implications of everything they had learned began to sink in, the students sat in contemplative silence. They had entered the lecture hall expecting to learn about an interesting historical footnote. Instead, they had discovered that somewhere in their galaxy lived a species so militarily dangerous that every other civilization had agreed to ban them from warfare entirely. Professor Vexitani began collecting her materials, signaling that the session was approaching its end. Your assignment for next week is to analyze the strategic implications of the Human Exclusion Act and consider what might happen if circumstances ever required its modification or revocation. As students began filing out of the hall, Zixthala and Grexmar remained seated, still processing everything they had learned. "Grexmar," Zixthala whispered, her bioluminescent patches flickering with uncertainty. "What do you think would happen if humans were ever allowed back into galactic warfare?" The insectoid's compound eyes reflected the ambient light as he considered the question. "I think," he replied slowly, "that every species in the galaxy would remember why we banned them in the first place." 3 weeks had passed since Professor Vexitani's revelation about human warfare, and the Zenthari Military Institute buzzed with nervous energy that had nothing to do with academic studies. Emergency broadcasts had been transmitting continuously for the past 72 hours, announcing something that had never happened in recorded galactic history: a unified invasion by an unknown species from outside the mapped galaxy. Zixathala rushed through the crystalline corridors toward the emergency assembly hall, her bioluminescent patches flashing rapid patterns of anxiety and confusion. Around her, students from dozens of species moved with similar urgency, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, chemical emissions, and light displays. The massive assembly hall, normally used only for graduation ceremonies and major announcements, had been hastily converted into a military briefing center. Holographic displays showed real-time tactical updates from across the galaxy, and the sight made Zixathala's internal chemistry spike with alarm. Red warning indicators covered nearly 15% of the galactic map. "Zixathala, over here!" Grexmar's voice cut through the chaos. The tall Vorthak had managed to secure seats near the front of the hall, close enough to see the detailed tactical displays clearly. As she settled beside her study partner, Zixathala studied the holographic readouts with growing horror. Fleet positions, casualty reports, and territorial losses painted a picture of unprecedented military disaster across multiple sectors of the galaxy. "How bad is it?" she asked, though the displays already provided a grim answer. "Worse than anything in recorded history," Grexmar replied, his mandibles clicking rapidly with stress. "The enemy appeared simultaneously in 17 different systems. They're using technology we've never seen before, and their tactics are completely alien to our understanding of warfare." Admiral Kethvar, the Institute's commandant, entered the hall with his characteristic military bearing, but even his disciplined composure showed signs of strain. The veteran Mordak officer had served in 3 different galactic conflicts, but the expression on his weathered features suggested this crisis exceeded anything in his experience. "Attention!" His voice resonated through the hall without amplification. "By now you have all seen the emergency broadcasts regarding the incursion in the Outer Rim territories. I am here to provide you with classified tactical analysis and to discuss options that the Galactic Military Command is considering." The holographic displays shifted to show detailed intelligence reports from the affected systems. The enemy forces were designated as unknown species designation, devourers, based on their apparent tactics and objectives. 72 hours ago, long-range sensor networks detected massive fleet movements approaching galactic borders from the void between galaxies. Admiral Kethvar continued. These forces appeared to emerge from some form of faster-than-light travel that our scientists cannot identify or understand. The tactical displays showed sensor readings that defied conventional physics. The enemy fleets had simply materialized in target systems without any detectable approach or energy signatures that preceded their arrival. Initial contact attempts were ignored, the Admiral explained. The enemy forces immediately began systematic attacks on all inhabited systems, military installations, and civilian populations. Their objective appears to be complete consumption of all organic matter and technological resources. Zixathala felt her bioluminescent patches dim with horror. Total consumption warfare had been theoretical until this moment, something discussed only in the most extreme academic scenarios. Our combined fleets have engaged the enemy in 17 different systems, Admiral Kethvar continued. The results have been uniformly catastrophic. The displays showed battle recordings from the engagements, and what the students witnessed challenged everything they had learned about space combat. The enemy vessels moved with impossible coordination, demonstrated technology that violated known physical laws, and employed tactics that prioritized maximum destruction over traditional military objectives. Enemy forces appear to be entirely mechanical in nature, with no detectable organic components, the Admiral explained. They show no interest in negotiation, surrender, or any form of communication. Their sole objective appears to be the complete annihilation of all galactic civilization. A Drakmori student raised her scaled hand. Admiral, what about our standard deterrent protocols? Surely a demonstration of our combined fleet strength would encourage negotiation. Admiral Kethvar's expression grew even more grim. Cadet, we have deployed our most powerful weapon systems against the enemy. Antimatter torpedoes, gravitational disruptors, and quantum cascade weapons have proven ineffective. The enemy vessels appear to absorb or neutralize our attacks without significant damage. The implications of this statement rippled through the assembled students. The galactic military had spent millennia developing weapons systems designed to resolve conflicts quickly and efficiently. If their most advanced technology was ineffective, traditional military doctrine offered no solutions. Our casualty reports indicate that we have lost 60% of our combined fleet strength in the initial engagements, Admiral Kethvar continued. Enemy losses are estimated at less than 5%. The silence in the hall was absolute. Students who had spent years studying military strategy struggled to comprehend a situation where the most advanced military force in the galaxy was being systematically destroyed by an unknown enemy. The Galactic Council has been in emergency session since the crisis began, the Admiral explained. All available options are being considered, including some that were previously thought unthinkable. Zixthala exchanged glances with Grexmar, both of them remembering Professor Vextani's recent lecture about humans and the reasons for their exclusion from galactic warfare. Admiral, Grexmar spoke up, his voice carrying across the hall. Are you referring to the possibility of revoking the Human Exclusion Act? The Admiral's expression remained neutral, but the pause before his response revealed the significance of the question. That option is currently under review by the Council. The reaction from the assembled students was immediate and intense. Voices rose in dozens of languages, expressing shock, concern, and disbelief that such a drastic measure would even be considered. However, Admiral Kethvar continued, his voice cutting through the chaos, before any such decision is made, we need to understand exactly what we would be unleashing. Professor Vexitani has prepared additional classified information about human military capabilities that was not included in your previous briefing. Professor Vextani entered the hall carrying data storage devices that bore the highest security classifications available to galactic military forces. Her ancient features showed strain that her students had never witnessed before. 3 hours ago, I received authorization to access files that have been classified since the original Human Exclusion Act, she announced. What I am about to share with you represents the most dangerous information in galactic military archives. The holographic displays shifted to show new tactical data, this time focusing specifically on human military engagements that had occurred after their initial contact with galactic civilization. The information you learned in your previous lecture represented only the beginning of human military development, Professor Vexitani explained. After their exclusion from galactic warfare, humans continued to evolve their military doctrine in isolation. The displays showed intelligence reports gathered by long-range surveillance of human space over the past 2 centuries. What the students saw defied belief. During their isolation, humans have engaged in 17 major military conflicts with each other, the professor continued. Each of these conflicts demonstrated escalating levels of destructive capability and tactical innovation. The tactical analysis showed human fleets engaging each other using strategies that made their previous engagements with galactic forces appear restrained by comparison. Their willingness to accept casualties had not diminished. Instead, they had developed methods to maximize the effectiveness of their sacrificial tactics. Human military technology has continued to advance independently of galactic development, Professor Vexitani explained. Their weapons systems are now comparable to our most advanced platforms. but their tactical applications remain fundamentally different from anything we understand. One particular engagement recording showed human forces deliberately destroying their own colonies to deny resources to enemy forces. Entire planets were rendered uninhabitable rather than allow them to fall under enemy control. This recording shows the Proxima Centauri incident, the professor continued. Human colonial forces discovered they could not defend their settlement against a larger human fleet. Rather than surrender, they initiated a planetary sterilization protocol that eliminated all life on the planet, including their own population. The students watched in horror as the data showed a thriving colony of 3 million humans systematically destroying themselves to prevent enemy acquisition of their resources and infrastructure. The sterilization was completed in 6 hours, Professor Vextani explained. Every human on the planet participated voluntarily in their own destruction. The enemy fleet found nothing but a dead world when they arrived. A Zarathi student projected a question through frantic light patterns. Professor, surely this was an isolated incident of desperation? Unfortunately, no, came the reply. Our surveillance records show that humans have implemented similar tactics in 43 separate engagements over the past 2 centuries. Total population sacrifice has become a standard tactical option in their military doctrine. The recordings continued, showing conflict after conflict where humans demonstrated their willingness to accept unlimited casualties for strategic objectives. What was most disturbing was the systematic nature of their approach. These were not acts of desperation or heroism, but calculated military decisions implemented with clinical efficiency. Perhaps most concerning is their development of what they call cascade warfare, Professor Vextani continued. This doctrine involves the deliberate escalation of conflicts beyond all proportional response, with the objective of inflicting maximum damage regardless of consequences. The tactical displays showed human forces implementing strategies designed to maximize enemy casualties while completely disregarding their own losses. They would deliberately provoke stronger enemies into overcommitment, then use the resulting conflict to inflict devastating damage through asymmetric tactics. In one engagement, human forces deliberately provoked a much larger enemy fleet into pursuing them into an asteroid field, the professor explained. The humans then detonated their own ship's power cores simultaneously, triggering a cascade of asteroid impacts that destroyed both fleets completely. The strategic implications were staggering. Humans had developed a form of warfare that treated their own forces as ammunition rather than personnel to be preserved. Intelligence analysis indicates that human military doctrine now includes over 200 different scenarios for implementing total sacrifice tactics, Professor Vextani continued. They have created systematic approaches for maximizing damage while accepting complete loss of their own forces. Admiral Kethvar stepped forward to address the increasingly disturbed students. The question facing the Galactic Council is whether these extreme tactics might be effective against an enemy that has proven immune to conventional military approaches. The moral implications of this decision weighed heavily on everyone present. The galactic community had spent millennia developing civilized approaches to warfare specifically to avoid the kind of unlimited destruction that humans practiced routinely. Preliminary tactical analysis suggests that human military doctrine might be uniquely suited to combat against the Devourer forces, the Admiral continued. Their willingness to accept unlimited casualties could offset the enemy's technological advantages. Professor Vextani accessed additional files showing theoretical battle projections that had been hastily compiled by galactic military strategists. Computer simulations indicate that human cascade warfare tactics could potentially inflict significant damage on Devourer forces, she explained. However, the cost in human lives would be astronomical, and the strategic consequences of unleashing human military doctrine in an active conflict zone are impossible to predict. The simulations showed various scenarios where human forces engaged devourer fleets using their characteristic sacrificial tactics. In most cases, the projections indicated mutual destruction on a scale that would devastate entire star systems. There is another consideration, Admiral Kethvar added. If we revoke the Human Exclusion Act temporarily to address this crisis, there is no guarantee that humans would agree to renewed exclusion once the threat is eliminated. This possibility had clearly been weighing heavily on the galactic leadership. Humans had already demonstrated that they would choose exclusion over military reform. If they were invited back into galactic warfare, they might refuse to leave when the crisis ended. Our intelligence indicates that human military capabilities have continued to expand during their exclusion, Professor Vexitani explained. They now possess fleet strength comparable to any major galactic power, and their technological development has followed paths that prioritize maximum destructive capability over efficiency or preservation. The strategic balance of the galaxy could be permanently altered if humans rejoined the galactic military community. Their approach to warfare would inevitably influence other species, potentially undoing millennia of progress toward civilized conflict resolution. A Mordak student raised several of his arms. Professors, is there any possibility of recruiting human forces for this specific conflict while maintaining the exclusion for future engagements? That option has been discussed extensively, Admiral Kethvar replied. However, human leadership has indicated that they would only participate under their own tactical authority. They refuse to operate under galactic military command or accept limitations on their methods. The implications of independent human military operations were terrifying to contemplate. Without galactic oversight, there would be no constraints on their destructive capabilities or tactical choices. The humans have provided their own assessment of the tactical situation, Professor Vextani announced, accessing one final set of classified files. Their response to our request for assistance is illuminating. The holographic display showed a communication from Human Military Command, transmitted just 12 hours earlier in response to galactic requests for emergency assistance. The human response states, and I quote, "We acknowledge the galactic crisis and are prepared to assist in resolving the threat. However, our participation will be conducted according to human military doctrine without modification or oversight. We estimate a 70% probability of eliminating the invading force within 6 months, with acceptable casualties projected at 80% of engaged human forces." The casual tone of this communication sent chills through the assembled students. Humans were discussing the planned destruction of 80% of their own military forces with the same professional detachment they might use for routine supply calculations. Furthermore, Professor Vexitani continued, human leadership has indicated that their tactical approach would include systematic destruction of any star systems that cannot be successfully defended to deny resources to enemy forces. The students struggled to process the implications of this statement. Humans were proposing to save the galaxy by destroying substantial portions of it, treating entire solar systems as acceptable casualties in their strategic calculations. The current estimate is that human tactics could eliminate the devourer threat, but the cost would be the complete destruction of 20 to 30% of galactic civilization, Admiral Kethvar explained. Billions of lives and hundreds of worlds would be sacrificed to achieve victory. The moral calculus was unprecedented in galactic history. No species had ever been forced to choose between extinction and the systematic destruction of a significant portion of their civilization. The Galactic Council is scheduled to vote on the Human Exclusion Act revocation in 18 hours, the Admiral announced. The decision will determine the future of galactic civilization regardless of which option is chosen. As the briefing concluded and students began filing out of the hall, the weight of the decision facing their leaders settled heavily on their minds. They had learned that humanity represented not just a dangerous military force, but a fundamentally different approach to existence itself. Zixathala and Grexmar remained seated as the hall emptied, both lost in contemplation of the impossible choice their civilization faced. "Zixathala," Grexmar whispered, his mandibles barely moving. "What would you choose? Extinction by the Devourers, or survival through human methods?" She considered the question carefully, her bioluminescent patches flickering through complex patterns of uncertainty. "I think," she replied slowly, "that both options would mean the end of everything we understand about civilized life." Around them, the holographic displays continued showing real-time updates from the front lines, where galactic forces continued their hopeless struggle against an enemy that conventional warfare could not touch. The red warning indicators spread slowly but inexorably across the galactic map, marking the steady advance of absolute destruction. In 18 hours, the galaxy would discover whether salvation was worth the price humanity demanded for delivering it. The Galactic Council chambers had never witnessed a scene like this in their 3,000-year history. Representatives from every known species sat in stunned silence as the final vote tally appeared on the central holographic display. 847 votes in favor of revoking the Human Exclusion Act, 12 against, with 23 abstentions. The decision had been made. For the first time in over 2 centuries, humans would be invited back into galactic warfare. Zixathala watched the proceedings from the student observation gallery, her bioluminescent patches cycling through rapid patterns of anxiety and fascination. Beside her, Grexmar's compound eyes reflected the harsh emergency lighting that had been activated throughout the station as reports continued streaming in from the front lines. The situation had deteriorated dramatically in the 18 hours since their emergency briefing. Devourer forces had successfully captured or destroyed 12 more star systems, and galactic fleet strength had dropped to 30% of original capacity. Traditional warfare had proven completely ineffective against an enemy that seemed to absorb damage and convert destroyed vessels into additional resources. "Emergency authorization has been granted for immediate human military deployment," announced Chancellor Vexathura, the ancient Zenthari leader whose voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Human forces are requested to begin combat operations within the next 72 hours. The response from human leadership had been transmitted within minutes of the vote's conclusion, and its content made several representatives visibly uncomfortable as it was read aloud. Human Military Command acknowledges galactic authorization for unrestricted combat operations. Deployment of First Strike Fleet authorized. Warning: human tactical doctrine will be implemented without modification. Galactic forces are advised to maintain minimum safe distance of 50 light-years from all human operational areas. Estimated timeline for threat elimination: 180 standard days. Admiral Kethvar, who had been monitoring communications from the military academy, stepped forward to address the council. "Your Honors, we have received additional intelligence about human fleet movements that requires immediate attention." The central display shifted to show long-range sensor data from the human quarantine zone. What the readings revealed defied all previous estimates of human military capability. "Human forces are deploying a fleet of over 10,000 vessels toward the conflict zone," Admiral Kethvar announced. "This represents a military capacity that exceeds our most optimistic projections of human development during their isolation." The sensor readings showed massive formations of human ships moving with coordination and purpose that spoke of extensive preparation. These were not hastily assembled forces responding to an emergency, but a military machine that had been developed specifically for large-scale warfare. "Furthermore," the Admiral continued, "spectral analysis of human vessels indicates technology that we do not recognize. Their ships appear to incorporate design principles that prioritize maximum destructive capability over traditional considerations like crew survival or equipment preservation. Professor Vex Tani, who had been granted special observer status for the proceedings, requested permission to address the council. Her ancient features showed deep concern as she accessed classified files that had arrived just hours earlier. "Your Honors, we have received additional intelligence about human military doctrine that was not available during our previous briefings," she announced. "The information reveals capabilities that exceed our most dire projections." The holographic display showed recent surveillance data from the edge of human space, revealing training exercises and fleet maneuvers that demonstrated tactical approaches beyond anything previously witnessed. Human forces have developed what they term extinction protocols, Professor Vextani explained. These are systematic approaches to warfare designed to achieve complete annihilation of enemy forces through coordinated self-destruction on a massive scale. The tactical simulations showed human fleets implementing strategies where entire squadrons would simultaneously detonate their vessels to create cascading destruction fields that could eliminate enemy forces across multiple star systems. One particular exercise, designated Operation Final Dawn, demonstrated the coordinated destruction of a simulated fleet of 50,000 vessels, the professor continued. The humans achieved this by sacrificing only 12,000 of their own ships in precisely timed detonations that triggered chain reactions throughout the enemy formation. The mathematics of such tactics were horrifying to contemplate. Humans had calculated exact methods for maximizing enemy casualties through their own systematic self-destruction, treating their personnel and equipment as expendable resources in pursuit of strategic objectives. Intelligence analysis indicates that humans have spent the past 2 centuries developing these protocols specifically for use against technologically superior enemies, Professor Vexitani explained. They appear to have anticipated scenarios exactly like our current crisis. Chancellor Vexthura called for order as concerned voices rose throughout the chamber. The implications of humanity's preparation were becoming clear. They had not been simply excluded from galactic warfare, but had been developing independently for inevitable return to conflict on an unprecedented scale. "The question before us now is no longer whether to employ human forces," the Chancellor announced, "but whether we can survive the consequences of their tactical methods." As if summoned by this statement, a priority communication arrived from human leadership. The message was brief and typically direct in its delivery. Galactic Command. Human First Strike Fleet has entered the operational theater. Initial contact with enemy forces in the Kepler 438 system will commence in 6 hours. All galactic vessels are ordered to withdraw beyond the designated safety perimeter immediately. Human forces will assume full tactical authority for the duration of operations. The council chambers erupted in concerned discussions as representatives grappled with the reality that they had essentially ceded military authority to a species whose methods they feared almost as much as the enemy they faced. Admiral Kethvar received real-time updates from Fleet Command, and his expression grew increasingly concerned as he read the incoming data. "Your Honors, our forces in the Kepler 438 system are requesting immediate clarification of orders. Human vessels have begun transmitting warnings that any galactic ships remaining in the system will be considered acceptable casualties." The casual tone of this ultimatum sent chills through the assembled representatives. Humans were not making threats or attempting intimidation. They were simply stating operational facts about their tactical approach. "All galactic forces are ordered to withdraw immediately," Chancellor Vexithura commanded. "Human forces are granted exclusive operational authority in designated combat zones." Meanwhile, in the student observation gallery, Zixthala and her classmates watched the proceedings with growing fascination and horror. They were witnessing the complete transformation of galactic military doctrine in real time. "Grexmar," she whispered, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with nervous energy. "Do you think the humans can actually defeat the Devourers?" "I think," he replied quietly, "that we're about to discover whether survival is worth the price they demand for it." The first engagement began exactly 6 hours later, and the tactical reports that filtered back to the council chambers defied all previous understanding of space combat. Long-range sensors provided limited information about human tactics, but what they revealed was beyond anything galactic military science had anticipated. "Initial engagement report from Kepler 438, Admiral Kethvar announced, reading from continuously updating data streams. Human forces made contact with Devourer fleet at 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time. Enemy strength estimated at 47 capital vessels and approximately 200 support craft." The tactical display showed the basic formation of the conflict, with human and Devourer forces engaged across a wide area of space. However, the specific details of the engagement were unlike anything in military archives. Human forces immediately implemented what appears to be coordinated self-destruction protocols, the Admiral continued. 63 human vessels detonated simultaneously in the first wave of attack, creating a cascade effect that eliminated 18 enemy capital ships. The mathematics of this exchange were staggering. Humans had achieved a favorable casualty ratio by systematically destroying their own forces in calculated patterns, treating their ships and crews as ammunition rather than preserved resources. Second wave engagement commenced 47 minutes later, Admiral Kethvar continued. Human forces detonated an additional 91 vessels to eliminate 23 enemy ships and severely damage 17 others. The reports continued throughout the day, painting a picture of warfare that existed outside all conventional understanding. Human forces were implementing tactics that treated their own complete destruction as an acceptable cost for achieving strategic objectives. Professor Vexitani monitored the engagement from her position in the council chambers, analyzing the tactical data as it arrived. The patterns she observed confirmed her worst fears about human military evolution during their exclusion period. "The humans are implementing systematic cascade destruction across multiple engagement zones," she reported. "They have calculated precise methods for maximizing enemy casualties through coordinated self-destruction, and they are executing these plans with complete precision." As the hours passed, the scope of human tactical doctrine became clear. They were not simply fighting the Devourer forces, they were implementing a form of warfare that prioritized absolute destruction over survival, victory over preservation, and strategic success over tactical conservation. "Status report from Human Fleet Command," Admiral Kethvar announced 12 hours after initial engagement. "Human forces report successful elimination of Devourer presence in Kepler 438 system. Enemy fleet completely destroyed. Human casualties, 97% of engaged forces." The silence that followed this announcement was profound. Humans had achieved complete victory in their first engagement against an enemy that had proven immune to galactic military technology. However, they had done so by systematically destroying nearly their entire force in the process. "Furthermore," the Admiral continued, "Human Command reports that similar tactics will be implemented across all engagement zones. Projected timeline for complete threat elimination remains 180 days, with estimated human casualties of 80 to 90% of total deployed forces." The implications of this strategy were beyond anything the galactic community had imagined. Humans were planning to save galactic civilization by systematically destroying themselves in calculated patterns designed to eliminate the enemy threat. Over the following days, reports continued streaming in from multiple engagement zones as human forces implemented their doctrine across 17 different star systems. Each battle followed the same pattern: coordinated self-destruction that eliminated Devourer forces while annihilating the majority of human vessels involved. "Engagement report from Vega System," Admiral Kethvar announced during one daily briefing. Human forces eliminated Devourer fleet through implementation of what they term stellar cascade protocols. Enemy forces completely destroyed. Human casualties, 94%. Side effect, Vega primary star destabilized by human tactics. This particular report caused alarm throughout the council chambers. Human forces were not only destroying themselves to defeat the enemy, they were implementing tactics that caused collateral damage to stellar systems themselves. Human Command has transmitted an explanation of stellar cascade protocols, the Admiral continued. They deliberately destabilize stars in enemy-occupied systems to create chain reactions that eliminate all Devourer forces in the area. This tactic appears to be highly effective but results in the permanent destruction of the affected solar systems. Professor Vextani stepped forward to address the increasingly concerned representatives. Your Honors, we are witnessing the implementation of human extinction protocols on an unprecedented scale. They are systematically destroying entire star systems to deny resources to enemy forces. The moral implications of this approach were staggering. Humans were saving galactic civilization by eliminating portions of it, treating solar systems as acceptable casualties in their strategic calculations. Intelligence analysis indicates that human forces have identified approximately 200 star systems for potential stellar cascade implementation, Professor Vexitani continued. They are prepared to destroy 20% of galactic civilization to ensure complete elimination of the Devourer threat. As the days passed, the pattern continued across multiple theaters of operation. Human forces engaged Devourer fleets using tactics that prioritized absolute destruction over survival, achieving victory through systematic self-annihilation while causing massive collateral damage to galactic infrastructure. The effectiveness of their methods was undeniable. Devourer forces, which had proven immune to conventional galactic weapons, were being systematically eliminated by human cascade tactics. However, the cost in human lives and galactic infrastructure was approaching levels that challenged the definition of victory itself. Status report from all operational theaters, Admiral Kethvar announced during a council session 60 days after initial human deployment. Human forces have successfully eliminated Devourer presence from 43 star systems. Enemy casualties approach 70% of total invading force. Human casualties exceed projected estimates, reaching 93% of deployed personnel. The mathematics of human warfare defied all conventional understanding. They were achieving strategic victory by accepting tactical annihilation, treating their own forces as expendable resources, while systematically destroying the enemy through coordinated self-destruction. However, the Admiral continued, Human Command reports that current casualty rates are within acceptable parameters for mission completion. They project total threat elimination within the originally estimated timeline of 180 days. Chancellor Vexthora called for a special session to address the growing concerns about human tactical methods. Representatives from across the galaxy expressed alarm at the scale of destruction being implemented in their defense. The question before us, the Chancellor announced, is whether victory achieved through these methods can be considered acceptable. Human forces are saving our civilization by systematically destroying themselves and substantial portions of galactic infrastructure. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental philosophical divide between galactic and human approaches to warfare. Galactic species viewed military conflict as a means to achieve political objectives while preserving civilization. Humans treated warfare as a mechanism for achieving strategic goals regardless of costs in lives or infrastructure. We must consider, announced Ambassador Krelthax of the Draconi Federation, that we may be witnessing not just a military campaign, but the transformation of galactic civilization itself. Human tactical doctrine is fundamentally altering our understanding of warfare and its acceptable costs. Professor Vexitani was granted permission to address the council regarding her ongoing analysis of human military operations. Your Honors, based on current tactical data, human forces are implementing systematic destruction on a scale that exceeds their original projections. She manipulated holographic controls to display the latest intelligence reports from human operational areas. Human Command has begun implementing what they term galactic sterilization protocols in systems where devourer forces have established permanent installations. The tactical data revealed strategies that went beyond anything previously witnessed. Humans were systematically destroying all organic matter and technological infrastructure in affected systems to ensure complete elimination of enemy presence. One particular operation in the Proxima Centauri system involved the deliberate destabilization of 3 planets to deny resources to devourer forces, Professor Vexitani explained. Human forces successfully eliminated all enemy presence, but the system is now completely uninhabitable. The reports continued painting a picture of systematic destruction that achieved strategic objectives while eliminating any possibility of future colonization or resource utilization in affected areas. Current projections indicate that human operations will result in the permanent destruction of approximately 30% of galactic civilization, Professor Vexitani concluded. However, they will also achieve complete elimination of the devourer threat within the projected timeline. As the final phase of human operations approached, the full scope of their tactical doctrine became clear. They had not simply adapted their previous military methods to address the devourer crisis. They had implemented systematic approaches to warfare that treated entire galactic regions as acceptable casualties. Final engagement report from Human Fleet Command, Admiral Kethvar announced during the last council session before the conclusion of operations. Human forces have successfully eliminated the final devourer stronghold in the Andromeda approach vector. Total enemy elimination confirmed across all operational theaters. The silence that greeted this announcement was complex, combining relief at the end of the crisis with horror at the methods required to achieve victory. Human casualties for the complete operation, 96% of deployed forces, the Admiral continued. Galactic infrastructure casualties, 31% of surveyed systems require complete reconstruction. 27 star systems have been permanently destroyed and are uninhabitable. The price of victory had been exactly what Human Command had projected: complete elimination of the threat through systematic self-destruction and massive collateral damage to galactic civilization. Human Fleet Command has transmitted a final communication to the Galactic Council, Admiral Kethvar announced, accessing the message that had arrived just hours earlier. Quote, "Devourer threat eliminated as specified. Human military operations concluded. We are prepared to resume exclusion status as requested by galactic leadership. We trust that our methods have adequately demonstrated why the Human Exclusion Act was originally necessary." The casual tone of this communication, delivered after humans had saved galactic civilization through systematic self-destruction, provided a final reminder of the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to warfare. Chancellor Vexithura called for an immediate vote on reinstating the Human Exclusion Act. The results were unanimous. All surviving human forces would be returned to their quarantine zone, and the restrictions on their military participation would be permanently reinstated with additional provisions. As the council session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chambers, Zix Thala and Grexmar remained in the observation gallery, contemplating what they had witnessed over the past months. "Zix Thala," Grexmar whispered, his mandibles moving slowly with exhaustion. "Do you think we made the right choice?" She considered the question carefully, her bioluminescent patches cycling through complex patterns of uncertainty and resolution. "I think," she replied slowly, "that we learned why some species must remain separate from others. Humans saved us by being exactly what we feared they were." Around them, the holographic displays showed the aftermath of human operations. Dozens of star systems marked as uninhabitable, casualty reports exceeding all historical precedents, and infrastructure damage that would require centuries to repair. But the devourer threat was gone, eliminated completely by tactics that no other species would have been capable or willing to implement. The galaxy was safe, scarred by the methods required for that safety, but alive to rebuild and continue growing. And humanity had returned to their isolation, having demonstrated once again why their approach to warfare was fundamentally incompatible with galactic civilization. In the end, the Human Exclusion Act had been proven correct by its own temporary revocation. Some species were simply too dangerous to integrate, regardless of their effectiveness or good intentions. The price of human military assistance had been survival itself, achieved through methods that no civilized society could accept as routine. The galaxy would remember this lesson, and the exclusion would never again be questioned by anyone who understood what human warfare truly meant.